Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir El Azouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we'll talk about training. So we have made a lot of audits, and always the question from auditors are how your teams trained or how to train your team, etc. So then we wanted to explain to you today this topic about training and how you can maybe solve this problem or this question from auditors. And for that, I have with me Rod Beuzeval from Trinzo and Katie Kune. So hi, Rod. Hi, Katie. Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Hi, Munir.
Hi, Munir. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, because I think, as we said, this is really an important topic that we are talking today. It's raising a lot of non-conformances with auditors. So we hope that today we'll provide a lot of tips for people to kind of pass this, overcome this situation. But before to start, maybe Rod, can you make a first introduction of yourself, and then I will ask Katie.
Absolutely. Thank you. So my name is Rod Beuzeval. I'm the Regulatory Centre of Excellence leader at Trinzo and also the principal trainer at MedDev Solutions. So some of you may be wondering what's the link between Trinzo and MedDev Solutions. MedDev Solutions was acquired last year by Trinzo to be the company's training arm. So all the training that we offer as part of our services will be run through MedDev Solutions, and all of the consulting that we offer is run through Trinzo. So hopefully that explains that.
Great. Katie?
Hi, thanks. My name is Katie Cooney. I'm the Training Centre of Excellence lead here at Trinzo, and I look after everything training. My background, really, I've come from a variety of training roles at all different levels of the business within medical device and pharma manufacturing.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for both to be here, because I think, as I said, we have a big topic to discuss, and I hope really this will be helping the companies. But first things first, maybe, because maybe people are asking that. So is this really mandatory for your teams to be trained? So is there a requirement, or it's like nice to have, or it's something that maybe regulators are saying, oh, if you don't need, then there is no need for doing that? So what is maybe your background about that?
So it's a good question, actually, because the requirement for training is built into ISO 13485 for quality management systems. And under clause 6.2, it talks about competency. Now, if I was to be asked the question, is it mandatory? Then it's possible that you could demonstrate competency without training. But the reality is, and for virtually 100% of manufacturing medical device organizations, training really is mandatory, because competency is built up of skills, experience, training, and things like that. And whilst a lot of people listening to this podcast will know that standards are effectively voluntary, it really does mean that you have to prove these things in another way that would be as equal to the standard. And like I say, the reality is training effectively is mandatory, because I can't realistically see a way of you proving competency in your own procedures without having some level of training on them.
And maybe just one thing to clarify. We talk about first the trainings, because you are trained, like you have a diploma, you went to a university, so you are trained about what you can do, if I can say. And we have also to remember that each time we arrive to a company, there is also new things to learn there, like the quality system and everything. So this is really what the notified body will be also looking at, not only your education, but also knowledge about how the company is working.
Absolutely. And I think that's why I kind of conclude that training is essential, because you may be qualified through doing some sort of degree or some sort of industry experience and training. But when you go to a company, their ways of working, their procedures will be different. And you have to understand that, and you have to follow the company procedures. There's so many non-conformities raised against the company's own procedures and not following them, which in essence means that you're not implementing an effective quality management system.
Exactly. Katy, maybe something on that point?
Yes, you do 100% need training. And, you can create a job spec that can tell you exactly what kind of person you want, what level of education and experience and areas of speciality that they may need to have. And then you can interview that person. You can ask them all those competency-based questions to make sure that they've got those relevant examples to show that they do indeed have that competency. But when they come then into your company, you have your own quality management system, and the way in which you do things can be completely different. So then you have to ascertain what training that person needs, what additional training they need in order to do their job. And that's when you start to look at induction, your corporate-wide training, something that's, no matter what country you're in, you need to have, such as maybe a quality policy. Then you need to start drilling down to location. That's your induction. That's your controlled environment. That's how to access the building. And then you're really then drilling down to the role specific training. And you've got to then break that down as to this person to do this role, they need X, Y, and Z. And I might work for company A, and their GDP procedure will tell me in order to correct something, I need to date it this way, but then I go into another company and that's not what their procedure says. So yes, not all companies' quality systems are the same, and they all meet their requirements slightly differently. So you do need that training.
No, I think it's a good point, because I was myself going from companies to companies, and each time I arrive, it's like 2 to 3 weeks of trainings, receiving all the procedures to read and to learn and answer quizzes, etc. And then I go to the company B, and it's exactly the same quality management system in terms of standard, but the content is completely different. So you arrive again and again, 2 weeks to read again all their documentation and try to understand that. So, which, if I can say, it's the arrival is really a lot of reading, but at the end, the objective is really that you understand, if I can say, how the company is working and how it is done.
Yes.
In terms of training, so here we talk about training, like you have to train your team because it's better, it's mandatory, etc. What means the training? Is just the fact that I'm receiving a procedure to read and I sign a document that, yes, I understand it, is a training? Or what means training exactly? What are we talking about? Is there different types of training, or there is only one type of training and we have to follow this type? Or
no, there's lots of different trainings. You have your read and a test type training, you read your procedure and your signature, whether physical or electronic, to say, yes, I've read and understood a procedure. But then you also have other types of training. So induction generally is in person. You have e-learning type trainings as well. E-learnings are great when you want to roll something out company-wide. It's standardized. People can access it anytime they want. It's repeatable. Then you've got refresher training, so not the one-off training. It happens year on year. Then you have on-the-job training. So and generally you take a risk-based approach to your training. So if it's a very minor risk to something, then maybe read a test is fine. But maybe if it's major, such as I'm now expected to make a catheter, well, then that's major, and that's then on the job training. So there's so many different types of training, a workshop, a conference, all of these things can be considered a training. It's basically the imparting of knowledge to others.
But should you define that on procedures, or it's something that you say anything of that can be training and we can accept all that? Or you say, if it is low risk, we accept this, but if it is high risk, you have to go through that? Or is there some kind of rules also to place on procedures?
Yeah, I would determine that 100%. I would determine that in your procedure, exactly what type of training you conduct, what the risk levels are, and then what the solution that you're going to provide to that is. Yes, 100% should be in there.
So you've said also conferences. It's external then to companies, then you go there. So the fact to go to somewhere to see some presentation or things can be also considered as training, and you can include that also on your curricula to say, yes, I have been trained on this and that.
That's more continuous professional development when you go to a conference. So you can ask for evidence that they've attended that, and you can keep that within the file of that person and have that as evidence to show that they are continuously developing. But it wouldn't necessarily be the type of training you put against something that you're being audited for. So generally, the sorts of training you're being audited against are normally procedural based, whether it's the first time or the update. It's generally the on-the-job type training, and then you generally would use e-learnings for things like your annual quality system update, refresher training, etc., etc. So the types of training are more depending on what you're trying to achieve. So that's really what you want to think about there.
And so I just add to that as well, with respect to things like conferences, depending on what level of competency you've set for the job role, as an example, one of the requirements may be continuing professional development, in which case that would be very supportive. And that is something that an auditor could be interested in, maintaining the right level of competence for that role as well.
And when we talked about conferences, but we can also involve an external company then also to come and help you. Because I think, for example, if we have to be trained on a certain standard, maybe there is not enough resources inside to help, and then involving an external company is also an option that they can take. Absolutely.
And, it's an interesting one, actually, because, we've been delivering a lot of training on things like risk management. So 14971. And what often happens is a company will undergo an audit. And one of the requirements of 14971 is that you have somebody competent in risk management techniques to effectively manage the risk group. And we often get calls of people saying, we've just had a notified body audit, or something just happened and we need some training in-house externally. And that is, of course, something that we can support. We'll do the training, they'll get a certificate. And I think that we'll talk about kind of external training later on in the podcast, but certainly that is also valuable training for any company as well.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think, this is kind of a lot of ways to answer to the question of how we can train people. But I think it's important people, when they are creating procedures, they place all those types of training that are accepted to be answering the requirements of the ISO 13485. So the other question I had for you is mainly, at a certain point, you have a new employee, so we are training them. But after maybe 1 year or 2 years, you always want your people, if I can say, to upgrade or to learn more, or to be more qualified, etc., because it's important also for your company to have people that are always up to date. So do you know, maybe a kind of method, how are you deciding which training for which person, or what do you have a methodology for doing this kind of thing?
Within a company, generally you would have set competencies per role, and you would conduct either biannual or annual performance reviews against those. So if you set a level, say, within that competency that they have to be skill directed or autonomous within that competency, and they're at one level, but that job demands you to be at a high level, then yes, they can use that performance review to assess and to work out how they're going to develop that person further, whether it be through a formal education piece or some experience and some exposure that allows them to gain more of that competence. But you also can use that in order to do your succession planning, where, for instance, my next role is going to be as a director, and what are the competencies for that role? How do I score against those? And if that's where I want to be in the next 2 to 3 years, what do I need to do to get there also? And that's generally done in quite an official way, either biannually or annually through a performance review, depending on the company.
And this is something that, for example, if you arrive from a role of maybe a quality engineer, then you move to a role of manager, and then you move to a role of director. I suppose that auditors can also look at the additional qualification, because maybe this person has a diploma in science, but it's not like a diploma in engineering or managing of teams or whatever. So are there also, is there like of things like looking, are you really qualified for this job, or did we give you just a title for giving you a title?
And, I think that's a really good point, because what the important thing is that you're competent to do your role under the quality management system. And, as Katie said, you'll have defined competency levels, and the expectation is that you'll meet those if you're ever tested against them. So if an auditor comes in and says, what makes you qualified or competent to do this role? Again, I would take it as risk-based. Because, if you're all of a sudden in charge of some critical production, then maybe experience is really, really important as well. And we mustn't forget that competency is not just necessarily training, it's skills, it's experience as well. And it all builds up into a bigger picture. And it's how you demonstrate that to somebody that is looking to understand, how are you competent to do this role? So it's an interesting one when you do move up with a company, and you see it a lot. You see a lot of people that start on the production floor and they work their way up through to management. And it's just understanding at what stages the competency levels move up and have they met them. And you've got to be confident that you've got the evidence to prove that.
No, it's great. And we have another also training decisions. It's also, we are in the right period now. It's about changes of regulations.
Yes.
So we have the new MDR, we have the new IVDR, we maybe have something new later. So yeah. I think here we have also like a decision by the management to say, oh, we have to look in the future. There will be a new regulation. Let's train our team for this kind of thing. So is this also something that is coming more and more now?
Absolutely. Yes. This is really, really important because as you rightly say, regulations change, standards change. And over time, you can't just rely on what you've done previously. The MDR was a huge, significant impact to anybody selling devices into Europe. And a lot of companies are kind of sat back reading this regulation and asking themselves, what does it really mean? And what's really important is that people have to be competent. And we've even got new roles under the MDR, like the PRRC as an example, where competency is very important to be able to prove. So again, visualizing that, looking to the horizon to see what's coming up, and do we need to establish some formal training? And indeed, a lot of companies looked at the MDR and indeed the IVDR and said, look, this is something that we're going to have to train en masse to the whole company because it's such a wide-ranging impact to everybody that works in the company that we need to have some training on this. And it may be that some standards, for example, when we had the transition from the second edition, 60601 to the third edition, that was more focused towards engineers maybe. And again, but understanding that that's coming, looking at the impact, understanding the risk. Sometimes a standard can be updated and it's just a very minor editorial update, in which case you're fine. The risk of having to implement some training regime is non-existent. You don't need to worry about it. Whereas examples like the MDR, the second to third edition, 60601 electrical safety, they were big impacts, and putting in a robust training scheme was very important for those.
I think it's completely clear because I saw a lot of audits where the auditors are asking, show me that you are trained on this or trained on that, because even on the 14971, it says at the beginning also that your people should be trained. So you have really to prove that you have some knowledge or training or a CV maybe with a lot of experience on that. So to expand to that. One of the most painful process, if I can say, that I see on training, painful not for me, but painful when I'm auditing some organization, is the effectiveness monitoring. So, effectiveness monitoring is more like you have done the training, but it's not finished. So it's more like, what's next? So can you explain what is an effectiveness monitoring first for people really to understand? And is it necessary? Can we skip that? Is it something, what exactly can we do for this kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm afraid you can't skip that. But yes, effectiveness is something where you're basically you're doing whatever training you're doing, and you're just checking that it worked, that the person got the message and those objectives that you wanted to achieve when you embarked on that training. And again, effectiveness really needs to be looked in a risk-based approach also. So it's all about risk. But say it was an admin change to a procedure, well, then that, is so minor that could just be an NA, no need for anyone to actually do a sign off on that training. But then if it's a small minor change, one up from an admin, maybe that's just a read in a test. But then as you start getting more complex into more major changes, then maybe that needs some kind of a classroom or a one-on-one training session in order to deliver that. And so the effectiveness then changes with that. So you don't necessarily need to do an effectiveness check for a minor change. But if it's a more complex change, then maybe a quiz question needs to be associated with it. So this is the change. And then you ask certain questions to be able to ascertain, did that person understand those changes? Has that knowledge then been passed through to that person by asking these questions? Do they answer those correctly? So yes, I can say that training was effective, but it would be very complex if we added that to every single change that happens. That's why as well, it's good to break it out into admin and minor changes. We don't need to do it, but if it's a more major change, yes, then for updates, we would do that. But then sorry, Munir.
No, I think it's exactly that, because when we say effectiveness monitoring, people maybe think there is only one way to do it. But as you mentioned, if you break down on the different topics, you can say, and you have a reason why. This is not because it's just a small change of a comma that was missing, and then we are changing that. So it's not like need to retrain everybody, but this is making sense to be retrained or having quizzes or whatever because of that. So I like really your process here.
Yeah, and then on the job training, you might be looking at a slightly different effectiveness check. So once somebody has been training, then in order to sign someone off, maybe you have some kind of a training checklist that you observe them, that you ask them open-ended questions on the procedure, and that they got those all correct. And you do something along those lines to say, yes, that training was effective. They are able to now perform that task. And then if it's a very high-risk step, like maybe it's final inspection, then maybe they do a test where they inspect 20 units with 15 good ones, 5 failures, and that they have to correctly diagnose those. So there are lots of ways of actually proving effectiveness, but then also your audits, you're not getting non-conformances, your CAPAs, they're all proving that your training is effective if training is not being root caused as the issue. So you're there bolstering it. And something I always like to say on this is sometimes when non-conformances are raised, training is an easier option to put on a non-conformance,
exactly.
But it's then making your process look like it's not effective. So it's not necessarily a good idea.
This is exactly what I wanted to ask you, because each time I have a CAPA, it's open. It says, oh, the person didn't understood well. So let's make, how they call that? A training, a certain type of
refresher.
Training. Can you say it?
A refresher training.
Yeah, refresher training or something like that. I say, what is the refresher training? You will explain to them exactly what you explained to them last time. It didn't work last time. So why would it work this time? It's the thing that makes me always laughing, because a refresher. The first thing is a refresher training. Maybe the person didn't understood because it was not well processed, or the work that they are doing is not clear at all. But I'm always amazed when I see these kind of things.
And that's so common. It's just so common that you see that, as this is how we're going in CAPA plans. You'll see, refresher training. And you're absolutely right, because if they were trained that way the first time, what makes it any different the second time? And so you do need to, I like to think from a process perspective, if the training isn't being effective, is it because the process isn't effective? Is the process complicated? As an example, are there simpler ways of doing things, or do you need to instigate something else instead? Refresher training is really putting a band-aid on something probably more deep-rooted.
No, I think it's clear. In terms of effectiveness monitoring, we talked also about the conferences or the training made by external people. Sometimes those companies are providing, and my company also, because I'm providing some trainings, and we are providing some kind of certificates that, yes, we have trained people, and maybe they have passed a certain exam or whatever, and we provided them their certificate because they reached a certain level of the exam, etc. So I mean, myself, when I make this training, I say it's a certificate. So people are always asking me, is it recognized by a notified body? Who can guarantee this certificate? I mean, all those kind of questions. So, I mean, from your side, because you have also this kind of service. So how can we answer to that?
So that's so another great question. It's one that we get asked all the time as well. There's a lot of mechanisms in terms of determining the quality of the training that you received, and as you say, part of that is you get a certificate to prove that you have attended some training. You have a test or an exam at the end, which also can support a certain level of learning that you've achieved. What we see is there are lots of companies out there which will have things like Exemplar Global certified, etc. Now, there are companies out there that will certify your training meets a certain quality. And, that's all good and well. IRCA is another one. And IRCA is quite well respected in the industry for ensuring that training meets certain criteria. However, from my perspective, what's really, really important is a couple of things. Number one, the trainer is competent to deliver that training. And you can determine that through getting their CV and through really scrutinizing their experience, their ability to deliver training. The other part is actually having the content that you were trained in available. So when I would go and audit companies, I'd be interested that there was a certificate. Ideally, I'd like to see that they passed the test. But then I'd want to look at the content of the training, and I would be able to scan that to determine, was this a high-level overview, which is great for the majority of people in a company that aren't doing a specific task, or was it clearly more in-depth, really looking at, so take risk as an example, 14971, if you are the risk management expert in the company, I would expect you to have like a clause-by-clause analysis, really understand the complexities of all the requirements, and the training content, the material that you've been left with should be able to demonstrate that. So as an auditor, when I'm going in, I can determine the quality of the training through the certificate, the CV of the trainer, and the training material. And that will give me confidence that training course actually delivered what it said. Because sometimes with certified courses that you get, they can still be very high level. Yes, they come with a badge that says certified by, but it's the content of the training that is actually the vital piece, and that's what you need to be able to have available in an audit situation.
No, I completely agree, and we had also got the question like, are you training through a new university or this kind of thing? So because then the university can back up this kind of training, etc. I'm always saying that I would not really, I mean, from my side, it's my point of view. So I would not really value, if I can say, a training from a university for our kind of job, because I suppose the person that are training those people are never had, if I can say, our positions or had our challenges or things. So it's maybe a bit more difficult for them to give them a deep dive overview of what is the job. I understand that they can provide a high overview, which is great. But when we have some people that they are asking us specific question, how can I do this on that way, on this way? And if you had never had this experience or never had the challenge or never talked to an auditor in front and try to answer his questions, it will be really difficult for you to give them a feeling of what exactly they have to do. So, as you mentioned, somebody with a good CV, with a professional background, with somebody that has experience also, I think would be a really great trainer, because he will provide you also not only the high overview of what is the regulation or the content of Article 10 of the regulation, but also how to implement that and how to maybe answer some question of the auditor.
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? Being able to put the text of a standard or regulation into practice for people, because that really is what you need to understand. Because you can read and understand something and say, yeah, I get it. But it's until you've lived that experience of facing competent authorities and notified bodies and getting their questions back, that really tests your knowledge.
Exactly. And Kathy, so let's talk now about auditors then. So maybe, or maybe Katie or Rod, but I don't know, maybe you had also this experience with auditors, but when we arrive to on the agenda to the section of training, then normally if you had gone through many audits, you know exactly what they would be asking. So for our audience, what are the things that they are asking when we are talking about training? So when they say, okay, now we'll go through training. So what is the flow, if I can say, of questions?
Should I take this one, Katie?
You can, because actually, Rod, it has been in a notified body and has asked all these questions.
Yeah, true,
what would you ask me, Rod?
Exactly. What would you ask? Exactly.
Absolutely. Now, I'll just explain kind of my approach. So when I would go to audit companies, there's a few basics that you are looking for. Of course, you're looking for a procedure to understand how the company determines competency, how they do the training, etc. So that's kind of the starting point. And the other main thing that I'm interested in is training records, of course. So each employee in the company would need to have evidence that they are competent. Okay, that's part of the requirements. It gets more interesting then, because now I was actually relaying this story to Katie the other day when we were just kind of talking about this podcast, and I was always a bit cheeky as an auditor, and what you tend to find is companies will pre-prepare a set of golden records, if you will, okay, and they will kind of have their best employees, the most trained. The records have been scrutinized, and everything is all okay. I would try and avoid those ones as much as possible in an audit, and because I know what they've done. When I was in industry, I did the same thing when I was getting ready for a notified body audit. Let's see whose training files we can propose to the auditor so that we get a nice easy time. What I look for in a company with respect to training is an important part of the audit is going around the organization, a site tour. Seeing manufacturing happening in action is really important. And if I see somebody doing something like maintenance, or they're doing something with the product, I make a note of their name, and that's the file that I want to see. Okay, because they're the most important ones. They're really impacting the product. So it's kind of a risk-based approach to it. And lo and behold, won't you know, it's not the golden samples that they've already prepared. They've got to go and dig it. And and again, I'm actually thinking about how long it takes them to retrieve the training file for me as the effectiveness of their processes, because sometimes I've had to wait a day, and I'm just questioning, okay, this to me doesn't seem like an efficient or effective process. So yeah, that's how I used to do things.
I think it's great, and I mean what you've said. I'm seeing that now from the other side of the table, if I can say, because when we were having this auditor that goes on the plant to see people, discuss with them, etc. And when you are asking the name of this person, we already know that you will ask all those things. So we go on the back room and we say, yes, we asked the name of this person. He was doing that. So check if he is clear or not. And the objective is not to hide any information. The objective is, as you've said, for you to not get it in one day, to get it in maybe 1 hour, because then we retrieve that and we send that to you. And while you are continuing to do that, in the background, the team we're helping. And I have made a podcast last time about front room, back room, just to help also to make all this happen. Yeah. But this is exactly what's happening during an audit. So picking names of people, random people, trying to ask, if I can say, what they have done, if they are trained or not, etc. And see if there is any mistake. I've seen also auditors that are taking a work order, checking which operations, and then picking the name of the people in this operation and check if they are trained for this operation. So we had spent evenings, if I can say, or nights, looking at all work orders, all names, all trainings to just check it that everything is correct or not. So I mean, we know all that, but as I've said, the objective is not to hide information. The objective is really to help the auditors to get that as quick as possible. Because for me, it's what I'm always saying. If you can give that as quick as possible, the auditors will have less concern because he has confidence to say your system is working. We can get that. If you wait 1 day to give a document that normally should be obvious, then there is some thinking of, oh, your process is not really correct, and let's dig more on this because I think this is not really a good process. But I think it's good here.
Yeah.
Do you have some?
Yeah. Sorry, just to add that I know they're going to look for your training files, but they may look for the job spec and the CV of the person and the proof of their degree or any training certificates they may have. And obviously, if it's electronic, make sure that you've agreed what type of non-editable report you're going to pull from your LMS system before handing that over.
I say that specifically for PRRC people. Please have already your diploma with you, have already your CV with you, etc. Not saying, oh, I will have to go back to my mom's house on the attic to try to find it, etc. No, have it already, and that people can get. I mean, auditors can get that and be on the safe side. Yeah. Okay. So now that we have looked at how you have your methodology for auditing, how we are collecting information, how we are checking that people are trained. Can you maybe share with us what are the common mistakes that you find during audits and that maybe can help people or manufacturers to not redo those mistakes or to correct those mistakes for future audits?
Sure. It's normally something very simple. You'll find with the training records, it is people that maybe have an incomplete record. They haven't formally recorded the training that they've taken, particularly with refresher training. That's a really kind of obvious one, that if the company says every year you need to do this training, and it may be something simple like IT training, or what's quite common is good documentation practice training, that type of thing. And they haven't done it in a timescale that has been issued to them. So they say every year you have a month window in which to do this training, and often people let it slip. People are busy, so it kind of goes to the bottom of their mind, and that is a particularly easy thing to pick up on. Not establishing levels of competence for the particular roles as well. And it's really important that job descriptions are clear with respect to the levels of competence required. If you're having to try and understand, well, what does this person need to know to do this job, then there's something that's not maybe quite right there. Katie, do you have anything to add with respect to electronic records?
For electronic records, something that comes up quite often is if the report that you've given to the auditor has a timestamp on it, and they've done a training in 10 seconds, that gets picked up on. Obviously you don't want to hide anything from the auditor, so maybe make that part of your process or your procedure, that people shouldn't try to complete too many trainings within a day. But also, if you can give a report without a timestamp, often that is also available, so not to lead them. I'm coming from the manufacturing side here now, not Rod's side. Not lead them down a certain avenue, which they may then start to look for lots of these timestamps after that point. So for electronic, and as you say, incomplete records, GDP errors on paper records, late refreshers, that generally happens more, I think, on paper-based systems. LMSs often have the ability to trigger refresher training, especially some of the more recent ones. And sometimes the length of time it took someone to sign off with updates. Many companies say maybe that the person has to complete the update before they perform the task or within 30 days, whichever one comes first or something like that. And then if they fall outside of that, that can also catch people out.
No, I think it's a great overview here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Monir, it reminds me of a story when Katie was talking about the timestamps on records. That really is a great one. Because if you're expected to fully read a procedure and then take a test, but you've done it in a few seconds, clearly you haven't taken that in. And I've certainly been to a company before where they managed to do an incredible amount of training in one day. So either it was an incredibly long day in which they didn't do the day job, or they actually kind of just said, I'm just going to sign this and get it done and dusted.
No, I think it's also something that maybe manufacturers think that nobody will notice, but this is something that is noticeable and that can raise also some questions. And I mean, you are auditor. I mean, you know how to audit. So the point is that when there is just a small issue, it's fine. But when there start to be more and more and more and more issues, then you start to see that maybe there is something behind. Let's dig more. So try to make your auditor confident on what you are doing, so that they will have no question to raise and the audit will go through easily. But for that, preparation is really important. So I hope you will be prepared for that.
I think you're right, Monet. Just to say the confidence thing, is really important. Generally, you can tell straight away as soon as you start looking at information, records, and procedures. You get a feeling for how well this audit is going to go or not. And if you start to see very simple things that really shouldn't be errors, then you start to dig, as you say.
Exactly. So I think mainly, I hope all this really helped people to understand. Is there any other elements that maybe we forgot to talk about on training, or something that maybe on audit or effectiveness or whatever? Is there something else, or I think we covered everything?
Just one thing. I think that if a company's employing consultants into the company, I think you need to look at that and how you manage that. Because if you've got somebody coming into your company and you want them to operate under your own quality management system procedures and processes, they also need training as well, because they then are brought into your quality management system. So I would just add, don't forget about contractors and consultants coming in as well.
And also internal auditors. I mean, I have had this situation where I am doing an internal audit for some companies. And what we have done is that I asked them, can you send me your procedures? Can I learn about them? Can I look at this? And can I sign a record that I have been trained on your processes? Because, I mean, it's not like they are coming, they are doing what they want. They have also to follow the procedures that are listed also. So also internal auditors, please. I mean, not the notified body auditors, but internal auditors.
That'd be great, wouldn't it, Monet? Just say, excuse me, you have to follow our procedure.
Okay. Cathy, something else from your side?
Honestly, I could talk about training all day, if I'm honest. There's so much more to know about training. But for now, I think we've covered some of the hot topics. So I'm happy.
Right.
Thank you, Munir.
Great, thank you. And so just maybe for people to maybe have some follow-up with you. So what service is Trinzo or MedDev service are providing? So what exactly you can say about that?
From a Trinzo perspective, from a consultancy perspective, Rod, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, sure. So for Trinzo, we're talking about medical device consulting, and we can effectively consult on any area of the device industry and indeed pharmaceutical industry as well, whether that be MDR implementation, culture improvement, efficiency, so Lean Sigma. We do have a really kind of broad capacity to take on a lot of different projects within that space.
And on MedDev Solutions, maybe?
MedDev Solutions, as we've said, it's the training arm for Trinzo. So there are a number of things that we can do in that area. So firstly, we do run public training courses on all sorts of topics, from MDR to IVDR, clinical evaluations, one coming up there in June. And you can currently go onto our website and register for any of those trainings. We also offer bespoke in-house training, and we deliver that either classroom in person, virtual instructor led. We can also have the capacity to create e-learnings, and that can be housed in our own LMS or the LMS of the company receiving it. So we do provide all sorts of training, not just in the areas that are on the website, but in multiple areas, as we have access to a lot of SMEs for creating content. Outside of that, we can also help you with your training processes and procedures, to help you to develop those, to help you to become compliant. And we can also help you with LMS implementation too, if that's something that you're looking at.
Great. So I think it covers really broad things, and I think just by listening to that, say, oh yeah, you are really the right person to talk about training, because there is a lot of things happening there. So and people can follow up with you also on LinkedIn, I suppose.
100% yes, LinkedIn. You can also follow up with us on the MedDev or Trinzo website. And I believe the email is info@meddev.co.uk.
Great.
MedDevSolutions.co.uk.
So,
MedDev Solutions.
Yeah, MedDev Solutions are there. So anyway, I will put all those information on the show notes so that people can directly go there, find the website, find your LinkedIn profiles, and then if there is any question, they can still continue and discuss with you. So thank you for that. Okay, so if you are listening to this podcast, don't hesitate also to put some comments or questions if you have, and I will forward that directly. If you have also liked this episode, don't hesitate also to put a like on the YouTube channel or also to send me a message at info@easymedicaldevice.com if there is any other topic or other elements that you want to hear on this podcast. Okay, Rod, Kathy, so thank you for your help and thank you for all the information that you provided.
Thanks,
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Manu.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye. Bye.